Members, this is the core bill. This allows local control. And also think through the process here of allowing each community to do this, because at some point communities are going to have to come to terms with some of what I described earlier today. And if essence, and again, remember what's clear in the Constitution is you have a right as a patient under Amendment 20. You have an affirmative defense under Amendment 20. You clearly, as a chronically ill person under Amendment 20, you do not have a guarantee of a constitutional form of delivery or a constitutional business, which is why in a local control state, this is to do that. But let me argue from a practical perspective. At some point with a new industry, where very clearly, yet again, another undercover reporter for one of the TV stations did a simple tour around, I assume it was Denver, and they basically found 5 of the 7 entities within that city were clearly disrespecting what we thought any kind of common sense. Thank goodness there were 2 decent business people in the community who said absolutely, by not at least asking for the medical marijuana card, they're making a fraud of the entire industry. Without at least some guardrails, each local community is going to be able to have a dialogue with and I've already met with some of them in Denver, and I said, look, you all need to form a Chamber of Commerce type status where you create a code of ethics. You need to effectively get your ability to make sure your community is comfortable with the way you do business. And if you're not willing to cut those kinds of common sense rules, then your community may make a decision to ban you because you're not applying the common sense rules. Let me give you an example. One of the things we understood prior to this bill is that there was a dispensary that basically put a van together that went to concerts. And the purpose of that van was to basically make sure that when we had Reggae on the Rocks, that the chronically ill who were at the reggae concert had their medicine available. We also knew that it was important that when the 14-year-olds who came out of Waterworld received a flyer, making sure, of course, the chronically ill 14-year-olds who came out of Waterworld who got a flyer that said, yes, you too need to make sure you're chronically ill and you too need to come down. On the 16th Street Mall the other day, we have a twirling derby now pointing to the dispensary on the 16th Street Mall. All of these kinds of dialogues are the kinds of dialogues we're going to have community by community. When a community has the right to say to its participants, folks, we need some common sense here. One of the arbiters of that common sense is either the community is going to bind up and make that decision, or ultimately they'll do what we do in Colorado, they'll vote a ban. And therefore, one of the best guardrails in this entire process that has been negotiated with the governor's office, for which he will veto this bill without this in it, is the common sense rule that people can say, you know what, the way you organize your business, the way you've chosen to execute your business is not comfortable in our community, therefore we're going to say no. And that's a very important part of this bill, and I would strongly argue that this is not something that we should allow to get on this bill, or basically at this point this bill is dead, at which point there is no protection for anybody in this industry.
Senator Cadman.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. The patient's #1 concern that came to the committee to testify in opposition to this bill was access and availability and the opportunity to address their medical issues with their constantly protected right to access medical marijuana. And I think Senator Carroll's approach is appropriate. If you give the right to ban, or the statutory right to ban, and all take advantage of that, and you provide zero access to people that have a constitutional right to access it, what are you creating? You're creating people that are probably going to have to go outside that constitutional requirement and try to acquire the product in some other fashion. So if you get this NIMBY attitude that goes community to community to community, where does that leave the access for the patients that have a legitimate use and a constitutionally protected right to access it? I think this is absolutely the most reasonable amendment of the 170, I think, that are coming, which is, I think, a record on any bill in the 10 years I've been in this body. We're at 170 amendments. Yeah, I've been here 10 years. I would ask for an aye vote on this.
Senator Newell.
If there was more, it was your bill.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And members, we heard 10 hours of, well, actually, I have been on all 3 committees, all 3 medical marijuana bills, so I've heard it all. And I heard 10 hours one night in local government, and one of the biggest issues was the access and the cost to the patient. Now, if they are protected by the Constitution, then let them be protected. And one of the issues that, that came up was the issue of this NIMBY, that nobody really wants to have these dispensaries except for Denver. So what we're going to have are all of the dispensaries in Denver, and every other town doesn't have them. So the question is, what about those people in the rural areas? How are they going to get access if their little town doesn't have anything for them, and they have to try to get to a place where they can, drive 120 miles? If you do not have these accessible, then you have also the cost that is being driven up, and then again the patient doesn't get the access. The other for me is looking around. My concern is that you do have towns that will put a ban on these, and then pretty soon you don't have any Amendment 20, and we all voted, not we all voted, but 5% voted for this amendment. It's in the Constitution. I ask for an aye vote.
Senator Mitchell.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Members, local control is an important value, and it guides a lot of our thinking and voting down here. However, here's the problem with suggesting that local control answers this issue and argues against Senator Carroll's amendment. There are other things that are set forth in the Constitution and have to be protected. In other words, there are things against which we balance local control. Now, the way this bill is drafted, it says you can limit the time, place, and manner of operating dispensaries up to and including not allowing them, provides theoretically for the basis to eliminate all production and distribution or all dispensaries from Colorado. Now, you might think that's only a theoretical threat, but even the theoretical threat, if formalized in the law, violates Amendment 20. Consider this, members, as an analogy. Consider the First Amendment, and campuses and towns and others, they can create sort of and even this is dubious, but it's been accepted that they can, in regulating the time, place, and manner of speech and protests, they can create speech zones and quiet zones. Well, if they were allowed, if we expressly gave local governments permission to create speech zones that, or no speech zones that could stretch up to and including all of the entire city limits, we would be authorizing them to prohibit First Amendment activity within the city. Everyone recognizes how absurd that would be. Well, if we can't authorize local governments to ban speech because of the theoretical threat to the First Amendment, neither can we authorize local governments to ban the only realistic model for producing, distributing, and supplying this product to the people who need it under the policy of Amendment 20. I support Senator Carroll's amendment.
Senator Kopp.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, I'm going to ask for a no vote, colleagues. The Constitution does not authorize distribution, and that's what these centers are. They are centers of distribution, and that's not what the Constitution did. So we should allow, if we're going to move this bill forward, the cities to have a full range of options, and they can be perfectly consistent with the spirit of Amendment 20. Ask for a no vote.
The question is Senator Carroll.